We love the fact that our church, the building that we gather in, sits in what we call a 50-50 in the city of Atlanta. You want rich people, turn this way. If you want poor people, turn the other way. If you want the upside of town, go that way. If you want the underneath of town, you go this way. And you can take a couple rights out of our parking lot. And within 1 mile of our church building, there are over 24 adult businesses, strip clubs and the like. And I think sometimes the church would think, wow, we don't want to be in that neighborhood, but that's where God planted our church. And to be a light on a hill, we got to be a light in the neighborhood. To be a light in the neighborhood means in some way we've got to find a path to share the love of Jesus in those places. And so we have this phenomenal team who will go into some of these establishments, build a relationship with the managers and owners, and ask if they can just come and love on the girls in the break room when they're there between their shifts. And so they'll take presents around Christmas or Valentine's Day. They'll bring gifts for their kids if they have kids. They'll just come and, lend a listening ear and pray for them and try to encourage them, speak life into them. And one night they showed up at this particular place on a Friday. And this day Rachel came to work at the club. And Rachel had such a difficult life. Her story is so painful. And she said that she was at such a desperate place that on this Friday, all the way to work, she kept thinking, I want to end it all today. And she kept trying to get up the courage to drive her car off the road in an attempt to take her life. And she said, but I couldn't get the courage to do it. So think about that. She arrives at work at this club, and that's what's going through her mind. I don't know what's going through the customer's mind, but that's what is going through her heart. And she's so frustrated, mad at herself. And then she hears the church ladies are here tonight. And she thought, I can't stand the church ladies. And so all through the night, every break time, Rachel would hang out in the little narrow corridor between the club and the break room saying, I'm not even going in there. Until finally it built up to the point that she said, no, I am going in there, and I'm going to tell those ladies exactly what I think. She burst through the door. She looked at the first lady and said, I just want to tell you, this is my life. And she just dumped her life out on the table and said, so where is God in all of this? And somehow by the grace of Jesus, that woman just looked at her. And all she said was, Rachel, I am so sorry to hear that that's your story. No judgment, no big story, sermon, message, just compassion. And that compassion broke Rachel's heart, and tears started to come down her face. And that conversation continued through the night. And at the end of that night, Rachel left that club. She couldn't go home. She was afraid. And so she went to a place where she could find shelter for the night. That turned into a 2-week stay in that place. And during those 2 weeks, someone in that program introduced Rachel to Jesus, and Jesus broke into her story. Jesus brought light into her darkness. He brought his love into her pain, and she gave her heart and her life to Jesus. She stepped from that moment into a 9-month program where she could totally, fully re-engage with the dreams of life again and hope again. And she completed that program, graduated, came back and was baptized in our church in the neighborhood, not 100 yards from where she used to work. Because this is a story of the power of God. And now today, Rachel is telling other girls who are trapped in similar stories that they can have a future and they can have a life again full of dreams, all because of the power of the one who brings the ultimate comeback, who brings us back from death to amazing and never-ending life. So the question for us all today is, what are the things in our lives that are literally carrying us out to death? I think it's so easy to hear a story like the story of Rachel and think, oh, that's such a sad story and such a sad life, and oh, bless her heart, I'm so glad it's working out good for her. But today's really not about Rachel. Today is about you, and today is about me. Because what we know from the very teachings of Jesus is that we all have an adversary. And the adversary's plan for our life isn't just to trip us up, it's to bury us in a hole in the ground. That's what Jesus said. He said, the thief comes to steal and to kill and to destroy. So we always amplify the backside of that promise of Jesus saying, and here comes the comeback, but I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. But the other side of that promise is just as real. And so is there a relationship or some decisions that we're making? Is there a habit or a pattern of life, something that we're refusing to give in and lay before the feet of Jesus today that is the thing that is carrying us out to that place of death where the thief will say, I have stolen and I have killed and I have destroyed. And into those moments today, it is possible that Jesus could speak life for you and for me, that he could bring us the greatest comeback of all, to snatch us out of the jaws of death and destruction and to bring us back into the land of the living. I love the story of the day that Jesus entered the little village called Nain. It's a story that Luke tells us in his Gospels, found in Luke chapter 7. And it says that Jesus and his followers were all coming to the gate of the little village called Nain. Nain means beautiful place. And as they came to the entrance to the village, a funeral procession was coming out. And Luke tells us that it was the funeral of a young boy who was the only son of a widow. And so immediately he paints the need for a huge comeback story. Because for this woman, her world had ended. Number one, she was a widow. In the day and age of Jesus, a widow had no rights, couldn't own property, obviously couldn't own a business, had no real standing in the community, but she had a hope. She had a son. And the son could own a business. The son could have a standing in the community. The son could make a way for her to have a life. But now through some circumstances, we don't know what, the son has died. And so out comes the procession. And so the son would be being carried on what to us would be a stretcher. It says a coffin in the text, but it's really a briar. So the body would be hastily prepared for burial. The context of the story tells us that this wasn't a wealthy woman. She was a poor widow, so there was probably a hasty preparation, a very simple briar or stretcher. And out comes the procession as they're taking her son outside the gates of the city to his burial place. But it just so happened on this day, as death was coming out, Jesus was coming in. And Jesus met the funeral procession leaving the little town of Nain. It says that Jesus did something crazy in that moment. He saw the look on the woman's face. He moved immediately with compassion towards her, and he said to the woman, "Woman, don't cry." Now, I love this because I pause in the stories and look in the little cracks and crevices of these narratives of Jesus' life, because why would you say to a widow whose son who's on his way to be buried, don't cry? For what reason would there be to not cry? Unless Jesus already knew in his heart, I'm going to turn this story around, and I'm going to turn it around today. And I just wonder if maybe that's what God is thinking right now for you and for me. I wonder if God, seeing what others can't see, I wonder if God, knowing what maybe the very closest people around us don't know, I wonder if God is looking at you or looking at me right now and saying, I'm going to turn this story around. The thief may have come to steal and to kill and destroy, but I have come to bring life, to give the most amazing life possible. And so Jesus is looking at the woman. I think he's cutting his eyes at the stretcher and looking back at the woman. He's looking at the boy and looking back at the woman. I think he's already sized up what he's going to do, and he's trying to say to her, don't cry. I know you should cry, but don't cry. I know normally you would cry in this situation, but don't cry. I would even cry in your situation, but something is about to happen here that's going to blow everybody's mind. Don't cry. And the scripture says that Jesus reached out and he put his hand on the stretcher and he said to the people, stop. Now, here's the crazy part of the story. Jesus was a rabbi. He had the reputation of being a religious teacher, a religious leader. And in this day and in this culture, a religious leader would never go near a dead person because they would be defiled and unable to go into the temple for worship. And so a normal religious leader would go on the other side of the road from the procession. But Jesus broke through all the norms and crossed right over to the stretcher, reaches out his holy hand and grabs onto this stretcher of death and says, stop right where you are. So he's looking at the woman. Don't cry. He's saying, stop to the funeral procession and the pallbearers. Stop, don't cry. Stop, don't cry. And then Jesus does the unthinkable. He looks at the dead boy and he says, get up. And Luke records that immediately the young man sat up on the stretcher and he began to talk. I'm wanting more information. I want to know, what was he saying when he started talking? Was he right in mid-sentence from whenever he had passed away? And so he's like, so what I was saying before is, wait a minute, why am I on this stretcher? And why am I wrapped in these cloths? And why is everyone crying? And then he adds it all up. I must have been dead, but now he's fully alive. And it says that Jesus took the young man from the stretcher and gave him to his mother. I love this because it means that Jesus reached out and took hold. Even if he was a boy, taking hold of a boy off of a stretcher means that his arms would have flexed, that Jesus would have showed that he was a man, and then handed back to the mother the son and said, here's your son, fully alive. I told you not to cry. Here is your son. And then you think, how much time was left before this funeral procession is the right distance out of town, and this son had been buried, most likely upright in a very small hole in the ground. This is no Joseph of Arimathea tomb like where Jesus was buried on the day of his crucifixion. This is a pauper's family grave. Probably all she could afford was a circle in the ground, hollowed down, where the son would be put down feet first and covered in that hole. Maybe it was 100 yards away. Maybe it was 300 yards away. But not more than 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and this son is buried. The funeral is over. But Jesus comes just at the right time, and he proclaims to everybody, there are going to be no funerals here today. There is going to be no funeral here today. And that's what Jesus is speaking into our lives right now. And for us to receive that, for us to lean into what this young man experienced and to be able to tell the story of that kind of a comeback, I was on the way out. I was steps away, hours away, days away from total destruction, from total collapse, from the biggest mistake of my life. And then Jesus entered the story. They'd already dug the hole in the ground. The enemy had already mapped out a plan for my destruction. But then Jesus entered the story. Jesus stretched out his hand. Jesus didn't wait for me to get my act together, but he reached out and touched my stretcher of death and said, stop right where you are. And I wonder if our story would be, and then Jesus spoke to me and he said, get up right where you are. Sometimes I think we want the miracle. We want the power. We want God to do what only God can do, but we don't understand that we have a role to play in the unfolding comeback that God wants to bring to our lives today. And that role is to get up out of whatever we have deceived ourselves into, and to stand up on the person and the truth of Jesus right here where we are, and to cling to him and to lean towards him and to walk in the truth that he is providing for our lives. This is how the comeback happens to you and how it happens to me. So at some point today, to be a part of a story like the story of the widow of Nain, we have to be willing to say yes to Jesus, and we have to be able to say no to the things that are leading us to our very own destruction. I love how God has the power to reach us where we are. I saw Rachel not too long ago, actually just a few months ago. And so now it's over a year since that first Friday night when God said to her, there's not going to be a funeral for Rachel today. There's not going to be a hole in the ground for you in life, but there is going to be a future and a hope for you and your son. There's going to be a dream for you in your life. And I saw her, and she looked so radiant, and her life is so on track, and she's giving everything she has to reach back to girls in the very same position that she was in and say, hey, you don't have to pick that path. You don't have to choose that outcome. But Jesus is in the story. Jesus' grace is enough for you where you are. Jesus is willing to enter into the mess and to lead you out to life. And she's doing that this very day. She is a living picture for us that someone at the very bottom of it all, on the brink of cashing in it all, can hear that voice of Jesus, the voice of grace and truth, the voice that says, I can change this, but you have to let me. I can redeem this and turn it all around, but you have to be done with it and say goodbye. And if you're ready, and if you're willing, I will interrupt your funeral today. And I will rewrite this story, and the whole world will marvel at what God has done. I love the way Eugene Peterson closed out this text in the Message. This is what he said. He said, they all realize. So now everyone is standing there just absolutely jaws on the ground at what just happened. And Eugene captures it this way. They all realized they were in a place of holy mystery, that God was at work among them. They were quietly worshipful and noisily grateful, saying among themselves, God is back, looking to the needs of his people. And then here's the conclusion. And the news of Jesus spread all through the country. That's what the outcome is for you and me. Because it's not just our lives that are at stake. It's not just our future that is at stake. It's not just our good that hangs in the balance. It's the story of Jesus being told to the world. And that story right now is waiting for you and me to say goodbye to this stretcher and to say yes to the one who can bring us back to life again.